Hey there, how you doing today? I'm Connie Fuksa with Foote Title Group, where we protect your home ownership. So today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the seller side. We've done this a little bit recently because I find that there's a lot of questions that people have that are selling their home that don't always have an avenue or the right information about some things that they may need to know. You know, the seller's part of the job once the contract is signed is not quite as involved as the buyer side, but there's still some things that need to be talked about and addressed, and maybe some questions the seller may have that we might need to talk about. So I thought maybe there would be some questions that might arise around this topic, and so I thought maybe I would help out with that. So if you have some questions, as always, please feel free to reach out. Let me know that you're online with us, whether you're tuning in on the live broadcast or if you're tuning in on the replay. I really appreciate your time, and let me know that you're on and that we're giving you information that's helpful. So, hey Lisa, how are you? Hi Angela. You're getting to be one of my regulars. Thanks so much for your time. Hey Phil, how are you this morning? Thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate it. So let's talk about it. If you're selling a piece of property, one of the most common questions we get all the time is, I don't have any of my paperwork. I don't know where it is from when I went to the closing and I bought this property. So I don't have my original deed. So am I still going to be able to sell my house? Well, the one thing that you need to understand is the ownership to real estate, or the title to real estate, is very different than the title to a vehicle. So when we have a vehicle, it's kind of confusing because you feel like you can't do anything if you don't have that title, which is very true. You're not able to sell it if you don't have the original title because you have to sign off on that title. There's a lot of things you can't do without that original title, so you have to go back to the Motor Vehicles Association and whatever it may be called in your jurisdiction, to get that original title, or get an original title, a duplicate, to be able to sell it or do any future things with that vehicle. The title to a piece of property is very different. Once that property is purchased, and that deed, which is part of the chain of title, but the deed is what actually transfers the ownership from one person to another. Once that deed is signed at the closing by the seller, the company that's doing the closing for you, the title company, will actually record that document. I'm sorry about that. I thought I turned off my phone notifications. Apparently not. That's one of my typical rules. So the company doing that closing will actually take it to the courthouse where that property is located and present it to the people at the land records desk, and they actually record that deed, stamp it with a book and page number, so it's actually filed in the county land records. And the reason they do that is because the ownership to a piece of property and the mortgages on the piece of property are public records. So anyone can search that information on that property and follow that chain of title to determine who owns the property, who has owned the property, who has a mortgage or who has a secured loan against that property, and how it affects that ownership. So once that deed is recorded in the land records where that property is located, that original deed can burn in a fire. It can blow away in the wind. Anything can happen to it because now it's public record and it's filed in the deed books in the county land records. So, and in some jurisdictions, those land records are actually online so people can search them. But once it's recorded in those public records, the original document is not a necessary piece that you need to hold on to. So if you're selling a piece of property, of course it's great to have that original deed at your fingertips. You're going to want your title insurance policy at your fingertips in case for any reason that you were to have someone make a claim against your ownership. That title insurance policy is like your homeowner's insurance. It gives you the rules and information on all the things that it covers. Now, if you don't have it, doesn't mean that you don't have coverage. So again, once that information is filed, a lot of things can be researched and determined who owns what and where it is. So once that deed's recorded in the land records, anyone can do a search of those public land records and see who actually owns that property, when they took ownership, what property they took ownership of. And so as a seller, not having those documents in your hand, any of those documents, but particularly the deed, is not catastrophic. You can sell your house, The title company isn't even going to ask you for those original documents, and you don't need to bring any of that information to closing from when you went to closing and purchased that property. All of that information that the title company doing the closing for the new buyer will need is things that are public record. Now, let me just clarify, there's a couple things the seller may need to bring to closing that we should talk about just for a minute, but the ownership documents are not one of them. Hey Shelly, how are you this morning? This is one hard-working lady right here. I have to tell you guys, I met her in person a couple of weeks ago, and maybe a month ago, and just to hear all the different things she's involved in. She's an advocate for so many people that need help in our community, and she works several jobs, and just really an impressive mentor and entrepreneur. So really nice to know you, and thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. Hey Chip, how are you this morning? Thank you guys all for your time. And let me qualify also by saying a lot of times I talk about things that may be state specific, and this is not one of those topics. Most of the topics I talk about are things that are not state specific, so no matter where you live, these rules or conversations will hold true. So we talked about the deed, the ownership part, but let's also talk about some other things that you may need for closing if you're selling your house. You may need, if one of the people that is on that deed, on that ownership, is not going to be able to attend closing, you're probably going to need a power of attorney. And that title company is going to want that original power of attorney, and more than likely they're going to want to help you get that prepared or have a conversation about where it's prepared and review it before closing, because they're going to need to make sure that all of the pieces are there to allow whoever is going to be attending closing to sign all the documents properly to make sure that the ownership is properly transferred. So if you know someone that's on that ownership cannot attend closing, you need to have a conversation with the company doing that closing immediately. So you can either have documents sent to where that person may be, you can have a conversation about what documents need to be signed off or presented in order to make sure that that deed is transferred properly. The only other thing that you're going to need is you need government issued picture IDs. And I say that, and you may laugh, but I've had people present BJ's cards with their picture on it, library cards, things that are not official IDs, and that's why I say government issued picture ID. I can't say driver's license because not everybody drives. So if you don't drive, having an ID card from the Motor Vehicles Administration would be great. A military ID is great. Some people tell me that you can't Xerox a military ID. Some people say it's no big deal. We will need to Xerox that ID, so if that's a problem for you, there needs to be a different identification. If you've lost your driver's license and you don't have that, we need to have a conversation about what you'll need at closing to make sure that we verify that the people sitting there signing the documents are the people that we need to have there. So other than that, identifying everybody that should be at closing because they are listed as owners on the property, we need to have that conversation before closing. We talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about if someone is on the ownership who is not going to be able to attend closing. Maybe it's not because they're not located in our same area. Maybe it's because that person isn't with us anymore. So we need to have that conversation as well, because we'll need a copy of that death certificate before closing so we can verify everything is where we need it to make sure that closing goes smoothly for everybody. So for any reason someone who is on that ownership cannot attend closing, we need to have a discussion, or you need to have a discussion with the company doing your closing before that closing happens. So that needs to be identified. A government issue picture ID, and if there's any change in names or owner, how the names on that ownership have changed. Let's say that when you purchased the property you were married, and when you're selling it you're a female and you got divorced and you took back your maiden name. We're going to need some documentation about that. So anything that could affect that ownership. And then finally, if for some reason you have to bring funds to closing, you need to have a conversation with that company doing that closing, how they will accept those funds. We don't accept anything over $500 except for wires because of the fraud. The fraud that's happening now with checks is just rampant, and so unfortunately we can't accept any funds for closing over $500 that is not a wire directly from the bank into our bank account. $500, it's a manageable risk that we decided is a threshold. In some states, they actually disperse the funds to the seller, actually write checks right at the table. In Maryland, it happens to be one of those, and because we can't verify those funds between when you present it at closing and when we give you a check. 30 minutes to 60 minutes later. That's why we require the wires, because the fraud with bank checks now is just rampant. So those are some things that you might need for closing, but don't freak out if you don't have the original documents from your closing. It's not a big deal. You probably never will touch them in the whole time that you own the property. And when you go to sell it, maybe the time you think about it, it doesn't matter. You don't need them. None of that actually matters. Just have a conversation with the closing company about maybe some things that you may have questions about beforehand. The buyer has the right to choose where that closing is going to be. And so if you're the buyer, make sure that you're telling everyone involved where you want to do that closing, because you need to make sure that the closing company is addressing some of these things that the seller may have, because you want to make sure your ownership is protected by making sure the right people are selling the property, or everybody who is on the ownership of that property is actually selling the property. So hopefully I helped you a little bit this morning. Good morning, Ann. Hey, Pam, how are you this morning? Thank you all for tuning in. Hey, Sheba, how are you? Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hope I helped you a little bit. If you have other questions, message me, email me, Connie at footetitlegroup.com. Today is June 1st, and by the end of the week, I told you our word for the year is execute. Well, my word for the word is execute. We will be putting out a new piece of content by the end of the week. So always check out our website every month for new information that could help you buying or selling your home. Right on the front page, there's a what's new in the middle of the page. You can click on it and you can download whatever that new piece of content is. So hope you guys are having a fantastic day. I love talking to you. I'm Connie Fuksa with Foote Title Group, where we protect your home ownership. And I would love to help you if you have any questions about closing, real estate, buying a new home, buying a piece of property. I'm there to help. So I hope you guys have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.